The Blackhawk's rotor wash kicked up clouds of Afghan dust as Lieutenant Commander Kestrel Phoenix Thorne stepped onto the tarmac at Forward Operating Base Meridian. The year was 2019 and something was wrong. Dead wrong. The intelligence briefings had been too clean, too perfect. In her 12 years of flying everything from Hornets to Ospreys, Phoenix had learned to trust her gut more than any briefing room full of colonels. And right now, her gut was screaming. The mission parameters were simple enough. Extract a high-value target from a compound 30 clicks north of Kandahar. Standard snatch and grab. But the satellite imagery showed defensive positions that made no tactical sense, guard rotations that followed no recognizable pattern, and communication intercepts that felt like someone was trying too hard to sound authentic. Phoenix had seen this before in Syria, right before her squadron walked into an ambush that claimed 3 birds and 7 souls. She walked past a group of marine mechanics working on a damaged Cobra, their coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and resignation. One of them, a lanky kid who couldn't be more than 22, looked up from an engine compartment that was bleeding black smoke. His name taped read, VASQEZ, and his expression carried that particular brand of frustration reserved for impossible problems. "Engines completely shot, ma'am," he called out, wiping grease across his forehead. "Took shrapnel in the turbine housing. We're looking at a full rebuild, minimum 3 days." Phoenix paused, studying the damage. The Cobra's twin exhaust stacks were mangled, but the core assembly looked intact. More importantly, she recognized something in the young mechanic's eyes, the same desperate competence she'd seen in her own reflection during her early days as a Nugget pilot, when everyone expected her to wash out of flight school. "If you fix this engine," laughed Master Chief Petty Officer Rivera, a female SEAL who'd been leaning against a nearby Humvee, "I'll call you Commander." The comment drew chuckles from the other mechanics, but Phoenix noticed Vasquez didn't laugh. Instead, his jaw tightened with the kind of determination that either broke people or forged them into something unbreakable. Phoenix knelt beside the engine, running her fingers along the damaged housing. Her father had been a mechanic before the cancer took him, and she'd spent countless hours in his garage, learning that machines, like people, often just needed someone who understood their language. The turbine wasn't dead, it was screaming for help in frequencies only certain people could hear. And this kid, she realized, was one of them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base, as Phoenix began to understand that this moment, this seemingly insignificant exchange beside a broken helicopter, was about to change everything. The mission brief forgotten for now, she focused on the sound of determination in a young mechanic's breathing, and the familiar weight of being underestimated pressing down on both their shoulders like the thick Afghan heat. The real story was just beginning. Master Chief Rivera's laughter still echoed off the concrete blast walls, but Phoenix saw something else in Vasquez's expression now. A flash of the same fire that had carried her through every flight school instructor who'd bet against her, every squadron-ready room where conversation stopped when she entered, every mission briefing where her tactical recommendations were politely noted and promptly ignored. She recognized the look because she'd worn it for years. "What's your first name, Vasquez?" Phoenix asked, crouching lower to examine the turbine's compressor blades. "Marcus, ma'am. Marcus Antonio Vasquez." His voice carried a slight tremor, not from fear but from the kind of electrical energy that comes from being truly seen for the first time. Phoenix nodded, running her thumb along a bent turbine blade. "Your father teach you about engines, Marcus?" The question seemed to surprise him. Most officers didn't bother learning names, let alone family histories. "Yes, ma'am. He worked on crop dusters back in California's Central Valley. Said engines were like hearts. They all want a beat, just sometimes need help remembering how." The poetry of the statement caught Phoenix off guard. She'd expected standard mechanic shop talk, not philosophical metaphors that sounded like something her own father might have said. Around them, the base hummed with its usual late afternoon rhythm. The distant thump of artillery, radio chatter bleeding from comm tents, the eternal whine of generators fighting to keep America's small piece of Afghanistan running. "This turbine housing is cracked but not fractured," Phoenix said, more to herself than to Marcus. "The compressor stage is damaged but the combustion chamber looks clean. What would your father say about this heart?" Marcus leaned closer, his earlier nervousness replaced by the focused intensity of someone in their element. "He'd say it's not ready to quit. See these stress patterns here." He pointed to hairline cracks in the metal. "They're following the grain structure, which means the metal's still strong. And this scoring on the compressor blades, it's uniform, which means whatever hit it was debris, not structural failure." Master Chief Rivera had stopped laughing. In fact, she'd moved closer, drawn by the unexpected technical dialogue between an O-4 pilot and an E-3 mechanic. The other Marines had gathered too, forming a loose circle around the damaged Cobra. Something was happening here that transcended normal military hierarchy. Phoenix stood, her flight suit rustling in the dry wind. The mission briefing was in 2 hours, but suddenly that felt less important than this moment. "You think you can rebuild this heart, Marcus?" "Yes, ma'am, I know I can." The confidence in his voice was absolute, unmarked by the usual hedge words that junior enlisted used when speaking to officers. It was the same tone Phoenix had used when her flight instructor asked if she thought she could handle the Hornet's landing pattern, the same certainty that had carried her through every test, every evaluation, every moment when failure meant the end of everything she'd worked for. "Then let's get started," Phoenix said, rolling up her sleeves. The sound of Marcus's wrench hitting concrete echoed across the tarmac as he stared at her in disbelief. Phoenix had been around Marines long enough to know that action spoke louder than rank insignia. She knelt beside the Cobra's engine compartment, her hands already moving toward the damaged components with the practiced confidence of someone who understood machines at a molecular level. The gathered mechanics exchanged glances. Officers didn't get their hands dirty, especially not Navy officers, and definitely not female Navy officers who could be anywhere else on base. "Ma'am, you don't need to," Marcus started. "I've rebuilt more engines than I've crashed helicopters," Phoenix interrupted, her fingers already probing the turbine housing. Though admittedly, that's not saying much. The comment drew a few nervous chuckles, but her focus remained laser-sharp on the damaged machinery. Master Chief Rivera stepped closer. "Commander, with respect, you've got a mission brief in 90 minutes. Phoenix looked up from the engine, her green eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun. "Chief, in 90 minutes I'm going to sit in a room full of people who will spend 45 minutes telling me how to do a job I've been doing since before some of them learned to drive. Right now, I'm learning something useful." She turned back to Marcus. "Show me the primary stress points." For the next 30 minutes, the tarmac became an impromptu classroom. Marcus guided Phoenix through the engine's anatomy while she shared insights from thousands of flight hours, explaining how different failure modes felt from the cockpit. The other mechanics gradually joined in, offering observations and questions that revealed depths of knowledge usually hidden beneath the casual disrespect of military hierarchy. The Cobra's engine began to tell its story under their combined attention. The damage pattern suggested a single large-caliber round had fragmented against the armored housing, sending shrapnel through the intake. The turbine blades were scored but not cracked, the combustion chamber was clean, and the compressor housing could be straightened rather than replaced. "This bird took a hit but stayed in the air," Phoenix said, running her hand along the patched bullet holes in the fuselage. "Pilot brought her home on one engine and a prayer." "Captain Morrison," Marcus said quietly. "She's been grounded pending psych eval. Command says she's too shaky to fly." Phoenix felt something cold settle in her chest. She knew Morrison, a solid pilot with 3 tours and a reputation for bringing everyone home. If Command was questioning her psychological fitness after a successful emergency landing, it meant the same people who'd be briefing the extraction mission in an hour were making decisions based on politics rather than performance. "How long since Morrison's been flying?" Phoenix asked. "2 weeks, ever since the incident." Phoenix stood, wiping her hands on a rag that materialized from one of the mechanics. The base's familiar sound seemed muted now, as if the air itself had thickened with implications she was only beginning to understand. In her peripheral vision, she noticed a group of officers watching from across the tarmac, their body language suggesting this impromptu engine repair session wasn't going unnoticed by higher command. "Marcus," she said, meeting his eyes, "how fast can you get this heart beating again?" His answer would determine more than just a helicopter's airworthiness. "Give me 4 hours and this bird will fly better than factory spec," Marcus said without hesitation. His hands moved across the engine components with the fluid confidence of a concert pianist attacking a familiar piece. "But ma'am, I'm going to need help. Real help, not just supervision." Phoenix glanced toward the cluster of officers near the command tent. Major Collins, the base operations officer, was pointing in their direction while speaking animatedly to a colonel she didn't recognize. The body language was clear. Whatever was happening on this tarmac was generating attention from people who preferred their hierarchies clean and their mechanics quiet. "You'll have it," Phoenix said. She turned to the circle of Marines. "Who else here knows turbine engines?" 3 hands went up immediately. Corporal Jackson, a quiet woman with Tennessee mountains in her accent. Sergeant Torres, whose scarred hands spoke of a decade working on everything that flew, rolled, or floated. Private First Class Kim, barely 19 but with eyes that had already seen too much. "This becomes our priority," Phoenix announced. "Chief Rivera, can your people provide security while we work?" The SEAL Master Chief's expression had shifted from amusement to something approaching respect. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? Collins is already making noise about proper channels and unauthorized maintenance." Phoenix looked back at the damaged Cobra, then at the faces surrounding her. Each person here represented something the military hierarchy often missed: competence that didn't come with the right credentials, intelligence that hadn't been formally recognized, dedication that transcended rank structure. Her father would have understood this moment perfectly. "Chief, sometimes the right thing and the authorized thing aren't the same thing," Phoenix said. "And right now, we've got a pilot grounded for doing her job, a helicopter that can be saved, and 4 hours until someone asks us to risk lives on incomplete intelligence." She knelt back down beside Marcus, her decision crystallizing with each word. "Besides, I made a promise to a mechanic, and Phoenix Thorn doesn't break promises." The nickname drew sharp looks from several Marines. In naval aviation, call signs were earned through fire, blood, or spectacular mistakes. Phoenix was a legend, not the comfortable kind of legend that got carved into monuments, but the dangerous kind that got whispered about in ready rooms and maintenance hangars across 3 theaters of operation. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "You're the Phoenix, the pilot who brought back that crippled Super Hornet from the Persian Gulf, the one who landed on the carrier with no hydraulics and both engines flamed out." "Same Phoenix who got written up for unauthorized aerobatics during that landing," she replied with a slight smile. "Now, show me how we're going to save this bird." As the sun began its descent toward the Hindu Kush Mountains, casting long shadows across forward operating base Meridian, an unlikely alliance took shape around a broken helicopter. Officers weren't supposed to work with their hands. Pilots weren't supposed to question intelligence briefings, and mechanics weren't supposed to understand the poetry of flight. But sometimes, Phoenix reflected, the most important things happened in the spaces between what was supposed to be. The real work was about to begin. The first bolt came free with a metallic shriek that echoed off the blast walls, and Phoenix felt the familiar satisfaction of a machine yielding its secrets. Beside her, Marcus worked with the methodical precision of someone who understood that hurried repairs killed people. The afternoon heat pressed down like a physical weight, but neither of them paused. "Compressor housing is definitely salvageable," Marcus muttered, running his fingers along the damaged metal. "These stress fractures are surface level. We can grind them out and retemper the alloy." Phoenix nodded, already mentally calculating the work required. Around them, the impromptu repair team had settled into a rhythm that transcended military protocol. Corporal Jackson was cataloging damaged components with the efficiency of a field surgeon, while Sergeant Torres had somehow materialized a mobile toolkit that belonged in a factory, not a forward operating base. "Where did you get a precision grinder in the middle of Afghanistan?" Phoenix asked. Torres grinned, revealing a gold tooth that caught the afternoon light. "Ma'am, you don't survive 3 deployments without learning where the good equipment hides. Army engineers 2 tents over have been hoarding machine shop gear for their bridge projects. And they're just going to lend it to you. They will when Jackson explains the situation to their motor pool chief. She has a way with words." Phoenix watched as Jackson approached a group of Army engineers, her posture relaxed but purposeful. Within minutes, she was leading them back toward the Cobra, their expressions shifting from skepticism to curiosity as they examined the damage pattern. "This bird took fire from a Zu-23, one of the engineers observed, running his hand along the shrapnel scoring. "Twin-barrel anti-aircraft gun. Whoever was flying managed to break contact before the second burst arrived." "Captain Morrison," Phoenix said, and command grounded her for psychological instability. The engineer's expression darkened. "That's bullshit, ma'am. Begging your pardon, but bringing home a bird with this much damage takes skills that can't be taught. This isn't instability, this is expertise." Phoenix felt something click into place. The mission briefing she was supposed to attend in 40 minutes would involve the same command structure that had grounded Morrison after a textbook emergency landing. The same officers who were comfortable sending pilots into uncertain situations while keeping their own hands clean. The same hierarchy that valued appearances over competence. "Marcus," she said, turning back to the young mechanic, "how well do you know Captain Morrison?" "She's good people, ma'am. Doesn't talk down to enlisted, always asks about our families. Real pilot, you know. The kind who understands that her life depends on our work." Phoenix nodded. In her experience, the best pilots were the ones who treated mechanics like the skilled professionals they were, not the interchangeable parts that command sometimes pretended they were. Morrison's grounding was starting to feel less like disciplinary action and more like elimination of someone who asked inconvenient questions. "Private Kim," Phoenix called to the youngest member of their group, "you've been quiet. What are you thinking?" Kim looked up from the turbine blade she'd been examining. "Ma'am, this damage pattern. It's not random. See how the shrapnel impacts are clustered here?" She pointed to specific scoring marks. "That's not defensive fire, that's targeted engagement. Someone knew exactly where this bird would be." The tarmac suddenly felt very quiet despite the usual bass noise. Phoenix exchanged glances with Marcus, both of them processing the implications of Kim's observation. If the young Marine was right, Captain Morrison hadn't flown into a random firefight. She'd flown into a prepared ambush. And somehow, she'd been skilled enough to bring her aircraft and crew home alive. "How do you know about targeting patterns?" Phoenix asked. Kim's expression carried the particular weight that came from surviving events that shouldn't be survived. "Before I became a mechanic, I was a door gunner. Flew 37 missions before taking shrapnel in my shoulder. You learn to read the difference between random fire and professional marksmanship." Phoenix felt the final piece of a very ugly puzzle sliding into place. The mission briefing in 30 minutes would send her into the same kind of trap that had nearly killed Morrison. The perfect intelligence, the too clean satellite imagery, the communication intercepts that felt rehearsed, all of it designed to put American aircraft exactly where enemy guns could find them. But now she had something command didn't expect. A helicopter they thought was permanently grounded, a mechanic they thought was just another E3, and a growing understanding of just how deep this problem really went. The question was whether 4 hours would be enough time to fix both the helicopter and the mission that was designed to fail. The precision grinder arrived on the back of an army mule, driven by a staff sergeant whose name Tape read Kowalski, and whose expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. But when Jackson whispered something in his ear, his demeanor shifted from reluctant compliance to active interest. "Heard you're trying to resurrect a Cobra," Kowalski said, dismounting from the vehicle. "My old man worked Hueys in Vietnam. Always said a good mechanic could bring back anything that wanted to come back." Phoenix helped him unload the grinder, nodding the careful way he handled the equipment. "What's your take on this damage pattern?" Kowalski examined the turbine housing with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen combat damage before. Whoever hit this bird knew their business. This isn't spray and pray from some teenager with an AK. This is precision fire from someone who understands aircraft vulnerability points. "Professional military training?" Marcus asked. "Or better, see these impact points. They're targeting the engine mounts, hydraulic lines, and control linkages. That's not random luck. That's someone who studied American helicopter design and knows exactly where to aim for maximum effectiveness with minimum ammunition expenditure." Phoenix felt her chest tighten. The mission briefing was now 25 minutes away, and every piece of evidence was pointing toward the same conclusion. American aircraft were being systematically targeted by someone with inside knowledge of their capabilities and flight patterns. Morrison's grounding wasn't about psychological fitness. It was about silencing a pilot who'd survived something she wasn't supposed to survive. "How fast can we get this engine operational?" she asked Marcus. "With this equipment, 2 hours for basic functionality, 4 hours for full combat readiness." Phoenix checked her watch. The mission briefing would conclude in 90 minutes, with takeoff scheduled for sunset. If her suspicions were correct, she and her aircrew were being sent into a carefully prepared killing field. But if this Cobra could be made airworthy in time— "Tors," she called to the senior sergeant, "how current are you on Cobra systems?" "Flew as crew chief for 3 years before transferring to maintenance. I know every wire, bolt, and rivet in this bird." "Could you fly as crew chief again, if circumstances required it?" Tor's expression grew thoughtful. "Ma'am, are you asking what I think you're asking?" Phoenix looked around at the faces surrounding her, Marcus with his father's wisdom and untested competence, Jackson with her quiet efficiency, Kim with her combat experience and analytical mind, Tors with his combination of technical expertise and operational experience. Then there was Kowalski, who wasn't even supposed to be part of this, but had committed himself the moment he understood what they were really doing. "I'm asking if you trust a mechanic's son to rebuild a heart," she said finally, "and if you trust Phoenix Thorn to fly it when the time comes." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Marcus spoke. "Ma'am, if this bird flies again, it's going to be because everyone here believed it could. That's not just mechanical work, that's faith." Phoenix nodded, understanding that they'd crossed a line from unauthorized maintenance into something approaching mutiny. But Captain Morrison was grounded for being too good at her job. American pilots were being fed into ambushes disguised as intelligence victories. And somewhere in the chain of command, people who'd never heard a shot fired in anger were making decisions that got aircrew killed. "Then let's get to work," she said, picking up a wrench. "Because in 18 hours, someone's going to need this helicopter to be more than just faith." The sound of the grinder sparked to life, cut through the afternoon air, like a declaration of war against the impossible. The first hour passed in a blur of sparks and focused determination. Marcus worked the damaged turbine housing with surgical precision, grinding away stress fractures while preserving the metallurgical integrity that would keep the engine from catastrophic failure. Phoenix found herself falling into the rhythm of mechanical work, her hands remembering skills her father had taught her in a garage that smelled of motor oil and dreams deferred. Compressor blades are straightening out better than expected, Torres reported, his voice carrying the cautious optimism of someone who'd learned not to trust easy victories. Whatever hit, this bird was moving fast enough to bend metal but not crack it. That's actually good news for structural integrity. Jackson looked up from her inventory list. We're going to need new hydraulic lines for the secondary flight control system. The originals took shrapnel, and I don't trust field repairs on something that critical. Phoenix paused in her work. Hydraulic systems weren't optional equipment. They were the difference between controlled flight and uncontrolled ballistic trajectory. How long to fabricate new lines? 6 hours minimum, assuming we can find the right diameter tubing and pressure fittings. We don't have 6 hours. Kim, who'd been quietly examining the damaged hydraulic manifold, looked up. Ma'am, what if we reroute through the emergency backup system? It won't give us full authority, but it'll give us enough control for basic flight operations. Phoenix considered the suggestion. Flying on backup hydraulics was like performing surgery with a broken hand, possible, but requiring skills that couldn't be taught in any school. That would put everything on manual reversion. No assisted controls, no stability augmentation. Can you fly a Cobra on full manual? Marcus asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Phoenix had flown damaged aircraft before, but always with some level of hydraulic assistance. Full manual flight in a combat helicopter required a combination of physical strength, technical knowledge, and situational awareness that pushed human capabilities to their absolute limits. I can fly anything that wants to fly, she said finally. Question is whether this bird wants to fly badly enough to accept manual flight controls. Torres grinned. Ma'am, the way Marcus is rebuilding this engine, this bird's going to want to fly so bad it'll probably take off without a pilot. The comment drew chuckles from the group, but Phoenix noticed something in Marcus's expression, a flicker of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. The young mechanic was feeling the weight of responsibility that came with other people's lives depending on his work. Marcus, she said, moving closer to where he was working, talk to me. What's on your mind? He paused, the grinder still humming in his hands. Ma'am, I've never worked on an engine that was going into combat. Back home, if I made a mistake, maybe a crop duster had to make an emergency landing in a field. Here, he gestured toward the helicopter. If I get something wrong, people die. Phoenix understood the feeling. Every pilot faced the same moment when theoretical knowledge met lethal reality, when the comfortable distance of training exercises gave way to the absolute finality of combat operations. The difference was that pilots made their own mistakes and lived or died by their own decisions. Mechanics had to trust that other people would fly their work into circumstances they couldn't control or predict. My father told me something when I was about your age, Phoenix said. He said the moment you start second-guessing your hands is the moment you stop trusting your heart. And if you can't trust your heart, you have no business working on other people's. She gestured toward the partially disassembled engine. Everything I've seen tells me you know this machine better than some people know their own names. That's not accident or luck, that's earned knowledge. The kind that comes from caring more about getting it right than getting it finished. Marcus nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Around them, the other team members continued their work, but Phoenix could sense they were listening to this conversation with the attention reserved for moments that might matter later. Besides, she added with a slight smile, I'm the one who's going to test fly your work. If you don't trust yourself, at least trust me to be too stubborn to let a perfectly good helicopter kill me. The grinder sparked back to life, and Marcus's hands moved with renewed confidence across the damaged metal. As the sun continued its descent toward the mountains, Phoenix allowed herself a moment to scan the horizon. Somewhere out there, in the gathering shadows of the Hindu Kush, people with professional training and inside knowledge were preparing positions that would turn American aircraft into falling debris. The mission briefing she was missing would provide detailed plans for flying directly into that prepared killing field. But here on this tarmac, surrounded by Marines who understood the difference between following orders and doing what was right, Phoenix felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the absolute certainty that they were building something that mattered. The engine was coming back to life under Marcus's hands. More importantly, something that had been broken in the chain of command was being repaired by people who understood that sometimes the most important battles were fought with wrenches instead of weapons. The second hour brought unexpected challenges and surprising solutions. The turbine housing proved more damaged than initial inspection had revealed, requiring Marcus to fabricate a patch from scrap aluminum that Kowalski somehow produced from the Army engineers' surplus supplies. The repair wasn't textbook standard, but it demonstrated the kind of improvised competence that kept aircraft flying in conditions that would ground them anywhere else. "This patch will hold," Marcus announced, stepping back from his work. "It's not pretty, but ugly repairs that work are better than pretty repairs that fail." Phoenix examined his work with the critical eye of someone whose life would soon depend on its integrity. The patch followed the stress patterns in the original metal, distributing load forces in ways that suggested Marcus understood engineering principles that weren't taught in basic maintenance school. "Where did you learn stress analysis?" she asked. "Community college back home. I was studying mechanical engineering before I enlisted. Figured the military would give me practical experience to go with the theory." Phoenix felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Marcus wasn't just a mechanic with good instincts. He was an engineer with hands-on experience, someone who understood both the theoretical principles and practical applications of the machinery he worked on. Command had filed him away as routine enlisted personnel, missing the kind of technical expertise that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "What changed your mind about college?" Torres asked. Marcus's expression grew distant. "My father got sick during my sophomore year. Medical bills ate through everything we'd saved for school. Military offered steady pay and medical coverage for dependents." He shrugged. "Sometimes you do what needs doing instead of what you want to be doing." Phoenix understood that choice better than she cared to admit. Her own path to naval aviation had been shaped more by necessity than childhood dreams. A scholarship program that exchanged 8 years of military service for flight training she could never have afforded otherwise. The difference was that she'd been lucky enough to discover she was exceptional at something the military valued. Marcus had been equally exceptional at something command considered routine and replaceable. "Your father would be proud of this work," she said. "Yes, ma'am. He always said that doing something right was its own reward, even if nobody else recognized it." Across the tarmac, Phoenix noticed increased activity around the command tent. Officers were moving with the purposeful urgency that usually preceded mission briefings, and several vehicles had arrived carrying personnel she didn't recognize. The extraction mission was moving forward on schedule, regardless of what this small group of Marines and mechanics had discovered about targeting patterns and professional ambushes. "Kim," Phoenix called to the young former door gunner, "you still have contacts in the intelligence section." "A few, ma'am. What do you need?" "Satellite imagery from the target area. Real time, not the processed intelligence photos they show in briefings. I want to see what the ground actually looks like right now." Kim's expression suggested she understood the implications of the request. That's going to require calling in some favors, and maybe bending a few regulations about information access. "How badly bent?" "Pretzel-shaped, ma'am." Phoenix considered the risks. Unauthorized access to classified imagery would end her career if discovered, but flying into a prepared ambush would end considerably more than her career. Around her, the team continued working on the Cobra with the focused intensity of people who understood that time was running out and options were disappearing. "Do it," she said finally. "And Kim, make sure there's no electronic trail leading back to this conversation." As Kim disappeared into the growing darkness between buildings, Phoenix turned back to the helicopter. The engine was nearly ready for testing, but testing would require starting the turbine, which would generate noise that couldn't be hidden from command attention. Once they fired up this engine, everyone on base would know that the supposedly unfixable Cobra was operational again. That would lead to questions they weren't prepared to answer with anything except the truth: that a group of Marines had taken it upon themselves to rebuild a helicopter because they suspected their own command structure was feeding pilots into prepared killing fields. "Marcus," she said, "how do you feel about committing career suicide for the right reasons?" His answer came without hesitation. "Ma'am, my father didn't raise me to watch good people die because bad people made bad decisions." The engine was ready for its first test run. The turbine's initial spool-up sounded like a mechanical prayer being answered. Phoenix stood beside Marcus as the engine climbed through its startup sequence, both of them listening to the subtle audio cues that would indicate whether the rebuilt heart was healthy or hiding fatal flaws. The sound was clean, no grinding, no vibration, no signs of the catastrophic failure modes that turned aircraft engines into expensive fireworks. Oil pressure is steady, turbine temperature is climbing normally, no unusual vibrations, Torres reported from the cockpit, reading instruments with the clinical precision of someone who understood that numbers didn't lie even when people did. "This engine is running better than factory specifications." Phoenix felt a moment of professional satisfaction that was immediately overshadowed by the implications of success. They now had an operational helicopter that command didn't know existed, which meant they had options that hadn't existed an hour ago. The question was whether those options included anything that wouldn't result in court-martial proceedings for everyone involved. Kim reappeared from the shadows between buildings, carrying a tablet that definitely wasn't standard-issue equipment. Her expression was grim enough to suggest that the satellite imagery had confirmed their worst suspicions. "Ma'am, you need to see this," she said, activating the tablet's display. The real-time satellite feed showed the extraction target area in crystalline detail, but what dominated the image wasn't the compound they were supposed to assault. It was the defensive positions surrounding it. Professional fighting positions, carefully concealed anti-aircraft weapons, and movement patterns that suggested significantly more enemy personnel than intelligence estimates had indicated. "This isn't a high-value target extraction," Phoenix said, studying the imagery. "This is a prepared ambush designed to destroy American aircraft." Marcus looked over her shoulder at the screen. "Ma'am, those defensive positions. They're positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that would catch helicopters in a crossfire pattern. Whoever set this up knows American tactical doctrine and helicopter vulnerability profiles." Phoenix felt something cold and final settling in her chest. The mission briefing she'd missed had undoubtedly presented this target as a routine extraction with minimal resistance expected. The aircrew that launched in 3 hours would fly directly into the most sophisticated anti-aircraft trap she'd ever seen, and they'd do it believing they had every advantage. "How many aircraft are scheduled for this mission?" she asked Kim. "4 helicopters, ma'am. 2 Cobras for escort, 2 Blackhawks for extraction, plus a Predator drone for overwatch and close air support from an A-10 that'll be orbiting outside the target area." Phoenix calculated quickly. At minimum, that represented 24 aircrew members plus the high-value personnel they were supposed to extract, all of them walking into a killing field that had been prepared by someone with intimate knowledge of American capabilities and operational procedures. Who developed the intelligence for this mission? She asked. Kim's expression grew even more troubled. That's the problem, ma'am. The intelligence came through channels that bypass normal verification procedures. Someone with very high security clearance pushed this mission through without the usual cross-referencing and confirmation protocols. Phoenix felt the last piece of the puzzle sliding into place. This wasn't just battlefield preparation by a competent enemy. This was betrayal from within their own command structure. Someone with access to classified operational information was feeding American aircraft into prepared ambushes, and they were doing it through intelligence channels that discouraged questioning and verification. "Tors," she called toward the helicopter. "How long to get this bird fully mission-ready?" "Hydraulic rerouting is complete. Flight controls are responding normally. Weapon systems are offline, but the aircraft is flyable," he replied. "Give me 30 minutes to run final systems checks, and she's ready for combat operations." Phoenix looked around at the faces surrounding her. Each person here had committed themselves to something that transcended normal military hierarchy and regulation. They'd rebuilt a helicopter that command considered unfixable, uncovered evidence of systematic betrayal from within their own ranks, and were now faced with the choice between following orders that would get people killed or taking action that would destroy their careers. "I can't ask any of you to take this further," she said. "What we're talking about now goes beyond unauthorized maintenance into active disobedience of direct orders. Anyone who wants to walk away right now, no questions asked, no judgment from me." No one moved. Marcus spoke first. "Ma'am, 24 aircrew members are about to fly into an ambush. If this helicopter can make a difference in whether they come home alive, then fixing this engine was the most important thing I'll ever do." Phoenix nodded, understanding that they'd passed the point where career considerations mattered more than conscience. The mission would launch in 2.5 hours, and Phoenix Thorn was going to be flying when it did, whether command knew about it or not. The final preparations began in earnest as full darkness settled over forward operating base Meridian. Phoenix slipped into the Cobra's cockpit for the first time, her hands finding familiar positions on controls that represented thousands of hours of flight training and combat experience. The aircraft felt solid beneath her, responsive in